Once you feel that you're in alignment, you've got that strong core foundation and you feel that you're in alignment, all of a sudden your purpose is like delivered to you on a silver platter. And then if you're courageous, if you've really done the great work, you've built the strong foundation, you will follow that nudge. And whatever that, I call it leading a movement. Your purpose is a movement, and it should be your career because it's your divine path, and it's all wrapped up in one. It's not separate. It's not go to the job and be that individual and then come home and be a different individual. It's only one.
The pressure to conform to society and do certain things ruins people's ability to find who they are and to find freedom within. We just jump in these patterns, and before we know it, we're just stuck, and we just have to get to the next day and to the next day, and then our life disappears.
When we are experiencing people that are, judging us or criticizing us, or even think that they're trying to bring awareness of something that they don't like about us, it's one avenue to be like, okay, yeah, maybe I chew with my mouth open and I should stop doing that. So you have to remember that everybody's consciousness is on different wavelengths. So not everybody's going to understand your perspective, and it doesn't mean that you have to change. But when you start to see things from the higher lens of because it's still a teaching, if somebody wants to criticize me, and to them, there's a lot of validity. But when I try to see it from their perspective, I struggle. So then I have to go inward and be like, what is this trying to show me? Because it's usually something different than what they saw. And so I get to determine what the lesson is, not them.
Just quickly, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who still listens to the podcast. I started 4 years ago, and since then I've had over 1 million downloads. I get 5,000 downloads per month, and I've had over 200 different guests. So a massive thank you to everyone who still listens. If you could please do me a favour, if you could rate and review the podcast, that will be amazing because it helps get the podcast out to new, conscious people like yourself. And my goal is to awaken as many people around the world. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's YesKingOliver. Should you wish to see what I get up to on my day-to-day moments. Back to the episode. So I'm going to be 32 in 7 days' time, and I'm also moving out of the family house on the 1st. Now, I moved out 7 years ago. I just literally decided within a week's notice I'm leaving, and I left, and it was disastrous. I shouldn't have been moving. It was just me wanting to suddenly take control of my life and just thought I'll work it out. I did work it out, and then COVID happened, and then I came back. And so now I always said to myself, the next time I move out, I will do it properly, where I'm financially strong, whereas before I was just using credit cards and I'll just get by. And I am not the same person that I was years ago. And so there's a massive thing that I believe in, which is timing. So if you take away what we want and what we think we need and just trust timing and trust God and the universe, there's no right or wrong answer. People will say, I've done the same thing for 8 years and everyone that I know's got a house, they've got a dog, they've got a family, they've gone traveling. And my answer to that is, that's all that they're going to have for the rest of their life now. Whereas I want to build my life up where I can now do anything for the rest of my life. And if I've only got those first 10 years to perfect my craft of doing what I need to do, I'm not going to be able to get it down the line if I have a family, when I've got a house and I've got bills and I've got mortgage. So the pressure to conform to society and do certain things ruins people's ability to find who they are and to find freedom within. We just jump in these patterns, and before we know it, we're just stuck, and we just have to get to the next day and to the next day, and then our life disappears. So I'm 32, I'm moving out, but I believe in timing because I've done things the right way, which I believe, which is build the layers underneath me, it means that I should hopefully have the rest of my life free.
Beautiful.
That's it. You stop from there.
Well, good for you. I'm glad that you've built your internal foundation strong enough to understand that you're trusting in your own magic. And that's really the whole game of life, is to understand that you are magic. And once you completely surrender to that fact, everything starts to fall in place. Even when it feels like it's falling out of place, it is in perfect divine order.
And that's the thing, right? There's this thing called, astrocartography and planet alignments, what planets were up in space when you were born. And is it Saturn? Saturn Returns came back like a year or two ago. And I always felt my whole life that everything I ever wanted was just a struggle. I could never quite get it. And then coincidentally, which I'm sure it's not, Saturn comes back and everything falls into place. People that I'm dating, money, business, things going right for the first time, and they're constantly going right, versus something goes right, and then it fucks up and it goes wrong. And so then I realized, if trusting within and just sort of flowing and not doing things irrationally, is that the same as trusting when the planet comes back around, that's when you strike? And if you're dealt cards where your planet is going to come back around in 30 years, whereas everyone else's planet might just come back around every 3 years, then I can't do much. And that's also the same as, trusting universe, divine timing, God, where when the time is right, it will happen. And for whatever reason, I have to wait 30 years before life starts to begin. Well, there was obviously a lot of karma and a lot of lessons to do along the way, which I have done and fixed and worked out and analyzed and put in myself and practiced, to the point where essentially I have no old karma that I used to have. So all the things that I didn't like growing up, I've dealt with. All my lessons I've become aware of and I've dealt with. And now the universe is like, right, it's time to go.
Well, discovering your life purpose is really the pinnacle of the path. Once you feel that you're in alignment, you've got that strong core foundation, and you feel that you're in alignment, all of a sudden your purpose is like delivered to you on a silver platter. And then if you're courageous, if you've really done the great work, you've built the strong foundation, you will follow that nudge. And whatever that, I call it leading a movement. Your purpose is a movement, and it should be your career, because it's your divine path, and it's all wrapped up in one. It's not separate. It's not go to the job and be that individual and then come home and be a different individual. It's only one. And so having that alignment within, and discovering the purpose, and then having the courage to follow the purpose, and knowing that the purpose is completely unique to you. So there's not going to be anyone to model. You're not going to be able, there's no template. And so everybody who's out there, selling the Kool-Aid to follow these templates, it's like that's steering you away from your own inner guidance. And so it's just such a magical process when you start to really know and have gnosis around who you are and why you're here. And when you have that kind of resonance within I call it the illumination of your Sophia light. You are integrated. You have achieved the alchemical marriage.
This is my analysis of this, right? So you could look at when I was at school in the younger days, everyone just was part of groups and followed each other. And I was always the person who's doing the complete opposite and doing my own thing. And so you could say, well, if they were or had the ability to not follow groups and do their own thing and be a leader for their life, then they would learn all their life lessons, and then they might not be part of society. But if you put it into like energy and astrology, they are only gravitating towards each other and in groups because they are weaker energy, so they need each other to complete each other. And then you've got the leader energy, which is I'm whole, I don't need anybody, and goes out and does it themselves, which means science has already put their energies together because they need each other to confirm and reaffirm things in their head, that the leader would go within themselves and trust their own answers, which means I couldn't ever be part of those groups, and they can't just decide to break part of those groups and then suddenly work within themselves and try and establish their path, because essentially they're only collecting together because all their planets orbit around the same time frequently, and a planet like mine might take so long that is why we were never the same, which means all their planets should come around every couple of years, and someone like a leader's planet will come around years and years and years down the line, which means we have no control over anything because it's all just planets gravitating towards the same energy, period. And all we can really do is go within, and if that is go that way, then that's what it is. Or if it's go towards that way, then that is what it is. It's just recognizing why things are like they are, and rather than beating yourself up about it and wishing you were like that, and you see all your friends moving out early and going traveling and getting a partner and getting a dog and thinking like, why can't I have that? It's not about that. That's like what their planets have gravitated them towards. You're not the same planet. So as you say, the rule book is completely different, and there is no rule book. You literally write your own.
So I created a philosophy of astrology. It's called Life Path Astrology. And in your 12th house, I call that the house of your Kismet client. And your Kismet client, who is basically your greatest teacher, they are the people that you're meant to serve, because they are the ones that are going to reflect back at you what your blind spots still are, what your lessons are, whether they know that they are showing you those things or not. That's what's happening, because the 12th house is the subconscious mind. It's the things that are hidden. They're the life lessons that you have not completed in the last cycle, and you're here to complete them now. So when you look at your chart and you see the 12th house and you recognize, like for me, I have the majority of my 12th house is ruled by Virgo. And so knowing that my Kismet clients are the Virgoian archetypes does not mean that they are a Virgo sun, but they might have a lot of Virgo planets, or they just might not have a lot of Virgo tendencies. And then you start to look at the characteristics of that 12th house archetype and realize how those shadows or those blind spots are showing within you. So for example, Virgo being a perfectionist, an overanalyzer, an overachiever, they're an earth sign, they're ruled by Mercury, they're always in their head, right? So you can see how when you are surrounding yourself with people, even as a leader, even if you've removed yourself from the group mind or the overmind, you're still recognizing lessons that are being shown to you through your Kismet clients. So when I'm talking about leading a movement, it's really like you doing the great work. You are one. Your career is one. Your relationship, it's all one. And then the people that you allow into your life, they're your mentors. They're your teachers. Even if they end up being a client or a customer, it doesn't matter. It's that, to me, is really segregating this concept of Kismet client, where two individuals come together to teach each other, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And that relationship is really about uncovering the blind spots and recognizing, and then thanking them for showing you something about yourself, and then them thanking you for showing them something about their self. So it's a symbiotic relationship, which is much different than, those initial relationships that we maybe have had, in the past with the groups, like got to have the dog and have the wedding and, get the bachelor party and like the whole thing. It's like, that's the societal mind. But what I'm talking about over here with Life Path Astrology is that the people that are in your life are there to serve you as much as you're there to serve them, but it's going to reflect only in those who really want to know themselves more deeply.
So it's almost like a group collective twin flame, where you're constantly being mirrored your flaws and things that you need to work on around yourself, right?
Yeah, because people can project, they can judge, like especially when you're a leader, you're a visionary and you've really got these avant-garde ideas, and then it's very natural that people come and judge you. But remember that their judgment is their projection and then your trigger, but that's your responsibility. So we can still take something that somebody is showing us that is like incorrect, like if it's a judgment, but if it stings us in a way, then it's our responsibility to figure out, well, why does that sting? And this doesn't mean that you have to go ask the person. It doesn't actually have anything to do with that person, but that's where the great work starts to flourish, and you start to see yourself in all that you are and the things that you really do still need to work through.
See, every single lesson that I have learned or that I've become aware of in me that was a bad one has been reflected by someone I've met. That could be someone at the bus stop in terms of how I spoke to them and how they said to me, "You're such a rude person, you know that?" I'm like, shit, I didn't mean to be rude, but if I think about how I just said that question, that's rude. So therefore, next time you're aware of how you say things affects other people. Lesson achieved. And stuff like when you're, around people in a restaurant and how you respond to the waiter when they say, "Do you want anything else?" "No, thank you." And you just go back to what you're doing, or you're on your phone. Then even make eye contact with them. And then you hear them talking to their colleague like, "That guy in table 9 is food." Stuff like that. Our environment is constantly reflecting what we are. And when we become aware of those things, we can see it from a third perspective, which is that a good trait or a bad trait? And for me, if it is a bad trait, or I would see that the majority would say it's a bad trait, I nip it in the bud immediately. And I think that is the only way to really evolve in like light years. As soon as you hear a bad thing said about you, rather than be defensive and be like, "Oh, fuck you," or "Oh, that's their problem, not mine." No, take it personally, reflect, and change that pattern. And then for people that, have not a lot of people around them, or people that are around them that they don't really want around them, if they change themselves, and those people around them will change. So it's a win-win for everybody to change those negative traits that the environment has made you aware of, and then your surroundings will start to change, because the more of a better person you become, the more other people will want to be around you. And then all of a sudden it's like that reinforcement of another good person's come into my life. I've changed myself to make myself better. More good people come. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. So now you want to keep changing yourself for the better, because life only gets better, but our ego gets in the way. We get defensive when someone says, "Oh, when you chew, your mouth's open," and the fuck you. It's like, no, because now you close your mouth, and now other people might want to sit around you and eat. And if they walk off, that's why. Then you've got a choice. Do you want to eat by yourself, or do you want to eat with people? Everything's like a God sign of, here's something that's not quite good, changed it, and life will get better.
So there's this concept called the true will. And for me, when, there's judgment or there's criticism, it's not that everyone's opinion really matters. It's really about if your core is strong, but strong from a higher faculty, not from an ego. So kind of how you were saying, like, well, fuck them, and that's their problem, whatever. That's the lower faculties trying to defend. But if you're really getting to the root and the core of becoming an enlightened being, if you will, a strong internal core, you have to focus on the higher faculties. And one of those faculties is called the will, the true will. And so when we are experiencing people that are, judging us or criticizing us, or even think that they're trying to bring awareness of something that they don't like about us, it's one avenue to be like, okay, yeah, maybe I chew with my mouth open and I should stop doing that. But then there's other times when the judgment comes where, you're almost confused at the projection of what they saw, because it's not actually genuinely what you were trying to convey, but it was interpreted as from their perspective. So you have to remember that everybody's consciousness is on different wavelengths. So not everybody's going to understand your perspective. And it doesn't mean that you have to change or whatever. But when you start to see things from the higher lens of like, because it's still a teaching, you know, if somebody wants to criticize me and to them, there's a lot of validity. But when I try to see it from their perspective, I struggle. So then I have to go inward and be like, what is this trying to show me? Because it's usually something different than what they saw. And so I get to determine what the lesson is, not them. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I was in the sauna yesterday and there was this guy who was just like coughing and spluttering and sniffing and making noises and going, ugh, and like moving his feet around. And I was trying to meditate and he was really pissing me off and I was getting triggered. And I suddenly became aware of, okay, I could walk out. I'm going to sit here. Why am I getting triggered? And I realized it's because I had Tourette's growing up and I was always making noises and and sniffing. And it was reflecting, fuck, was that what I used to be like my whole life with everyone I've ever known? How irritating and annoying I must have been. And it basically triggered off, fuck, is that what I used to be like? And that was uncomfortable because obviously once you become aware of how you affect others, you don't want to do it. And it was like, wow, 15 years of that. And my family just sit at the table and I'm sniffing and coughing. And it's part of the sound of the environment, like living next to a train track. And so I was sat in that sauna and I wanted to go out and I just sat there and I thought, how are you not self-aware? Like, do you have no self-awareness? Can you not see yourself making these noises and be aware that there's others there that might be affected by it? Or can you sense that they're being affected by it? Or are you aware that these noises might have an effect on others? And then I realized he's probably in his own head. He's probably got the narrative going and he's making all these noises. He's in his head. He's not even aware that he's in a sauna. He's just in his head. And then I realized, wow, he's got no self-awareness. So is that his fault? Technically, if he's not aware, it's not his fault, even though it's him that ultimately would have to change. But again, unless you become aware of it and see it as an issue, he's just doing what he's doing as if no one was there. So it's then how I respond to that. It's nothing to do with him. It's how I respond. And as we say, the triggers are within me. What is that trigger? Learn from it. Which is, I suppose that lesson could be, life isn't always going to be so smooth and easy where your environment's always in harmony with you. And just because it isn't in harmony doesn't mean you walk out. You know, sit in that uncomfortable state as a way of challenging yourself and testing yourself that life isn't going to be smooth all the time, and deal with the shit. So when it is nice and peaceful and everyone's meditating, then that's amazing. But sometimes it's going to be a noisy prick in there, and that's just life. You can't just walk off and you got to deal with this shit.
Right. And then we're talking about the Hermetic principles, the principle of polarity, where there isn't going to be the meditative calm setting without sometimes having the noisy snorts and grunts.
What's interesting is that I could be in the middle of a main road and there's people honking horns and people shouting, and that would be absolutely fine. I can just go into my zone. But for some reason, with him coughing and sniffing, I was getting triggered. And I can only think that it's because that's what I used to sound like, or what I am sometimes like. And because I'm very self-aware of myself and how I'm affecting others, because I had no self-awareness, I'm so aware now that it's like, wow, even if I sniff, is that what I sound like? Are others just seeing it as a sniff? Or is it me? I'm very focused on how I'm being perceived, that these small things are enormous things, whereas it's just a sniff and a cough and a yawn. And it's actually me who's so conscious of how I'm being perceived and not him.
So, okay. So here's another angle is because we're talking astrology a lot here, and in your chart, you have the elements. So have you ever looked at your chart and really counted how much fire, how much water, how much air and earth you have in your chart?
So I know somebody who's an astrologist, and she did my house, and she was like, this is a very, very, very interesting chart, house or whatever. I don't really understand it, 12th house, whatever, but she was like, this is very, very, very unique. And I just sort of took her word, like the feedback, of being different, but I don't really understand it in terms of, the charts and the elements.
Well, if you, and just for the listeners and for food for thought. So for me, I have a lot of Mercury energy because I have a lot of Virgo in my chart and I have a lot of Gemini. And then I also just have a lot of Scorpio. So with a little bit of water there, with the Scorpio bite, and then I have a lot of Mercury, which is all in the mind. So I can hear everything. Right. So Mercury I have this, it's a gift and a curse. So similar to how you're like, oh my gosh, like to someone hearing the snorting, they might even not even notice it. Right. Because they're not in that Mercury energy where they can hear everything. Like I can hear a pin drop across the street. It's too loud. I'm very sensitive to noise because of all of that Mercury in my chart. So while somebody might be like, that doesn't even bother me. So it's like, well, how do I balance my Mercury energy? How do I balance the air element of Gemini? How do I balance the earth element of Virgo? And those two zodiac signs are ruled by Mercury. So I have to now I have somewhere to go. I have like, okay, well, how do I get more grounded? And then how do I balance the mind? Because those two things, when they're out of whack, they're causing havoc on my nervous system. So that's where anxiety comes from. So if you start to look at your chart in as a lens that I call the alchemical constitution, where you're really looking at the elements of how somebody is made up alchemically. So alchemically meaning the salt, the mercury, and the sulfur. So we're going to look at the body, the mind, and the soul. And that makes you that unique character, right? So then you start to see like your life purpose, right? That you're leading is your own unique path. But you have to remember that it's partially, made up of those components in your chart. So your unique gifts can be your nemesis when they're out of balance. So those 4 elements become a very important tool and a kind of like a place to start, like, oh God, why did that bother me? And it's one way to be like, well, in the past, maybe I was like that too, but we can actually start to build some tools around it by looking at the elements and being like, wow, I've got my fire elements out of control, or my mind is racing. I need to calm the air, I'm feeling up in the clouds. I need some more grounding, right? So you can start to see those poles again, being able to balance them. One of the ways that I do this is through herbs. I'm an herbalist. I'm an esoteric herbalist. So using herbs to balance out my alchemical constitution is also a way to initiate yourself through nature, through plants, because plants are also our doctors, our mentors, our Kismet clients. And so you can start to initiate yourself in calming whatever the nerves or whatever they are through their initiatic virtues. So it's a bigger conversation if you're interested, but this is definitely one of the tools that has really worked for me in my life.
So literally saying that depending on when you were born and the planets that were around determines how much like elements you have in your physical body, and every human has different elements in their body based on when they were born, which means you will react to the physical reactions in life differently to others based on your own physical elements, such as someone's got higher mercury levels and I don't know, iron and whatever. Is that what you're saying?
Well, sort of. Yeah. Well, okay. So from an alchemical perspective, like the 7 classical planets also are part of the 7 metals. So in the 7 days a week, you're going to see that 7-fold, the 3-fold. Those are very common in many different traditions. So those 7 classical planets align with the 7 metals, and those align with the endocrine system. So you are a microcosm, and that macrocosm has, sprinkled its sidereal vapors, if you will, into your flesh. So when you're working with like your elements, you're looking at like, wow, I've got a lot of Mercury, the planet Mercury, right? Because Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini, but those planets also have a correspondence to other metals. So like, for example, Venus, let's say you have a lot of Venusian energy in your chart. You've got a lot of Taurus or Libra. So that's the metal copper, right? So if we are feeling a efficiency in, opening our heart, or being more go with the flow, or finding the beauty of life, like copper. You could even take it literal, or you could take it more metaphorical and think about even the archetypes like the tarot, like the Empress card. That's very Venusian energy. The Hierophant, that's more Taurus, that's more Venusian as well. So you start to see that like mythology and astrology and numerology and magic, and they're all like, I call it the 7-layer bean dip, because they're all saying the same thing. But when you put them all together and you take a bite, it all starts to resonate.
I don't know whether it's relevance, but if someone is like deficient in, say, potassium or magnesium or iron, has that got any relevance to planets and astrology?
So iron is part of the 7 metals that I'm talking about. Iron has to do with Mars. So if I was looking at someone's chart through an alchemical perspective, which is what I do some alchemical constitution readings, you would look at where Mars is placed. So maybe Mars is in its detriment. Maybe it's maybe it's in the 6th house. Maybe you're having these, the 6th house is the Virgo house. It's the house of wellness. So you can start to see through medical astrology where the deficiencies are. And Mars and Saturn, those are the two, what they're called the great malefics, where they always are kind of challenging your chart. And this could be physically as well. So when we're looking at even like the cell salts, most of us are all deficient in at least a couple of those cell salts, because we're only in the womb for 9 months, but there's 12 cell salts, there's 12 signs of the zodiac. So that means we're at least deficient in 3 cell salts. So we're going to start to see how hormonally our bodies start to react to deficiencies. And that might cause a deficiency in potassium or iron and so forth.
See, people say that, half the planet or whatever is deficient in like everything, vitamin B, potassium, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin C, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, that obviously means we don't need it. Obviously, I do agree that if you put stuff in your body, it will perform differently. But with so many humans deficient in everything, I'm like, well, 200 years ago, were they deficient? How about 1,000 years ago? How about people in Africa and people in Syria and people in Scotland? Like, if we're all deficient in it, does that not mean that we're not supposed to have it? Or or have we become deficient in it, say, over the last 200-300 years, and before we weren't deficient in it? So were humans not deficient in all of these B's and C's and E's and A's and K's and collagen 200 years ago? Or is it just the way to make money? Like, you could explain that. I'm trying to work this out at the moment.
Okay, think about it this way. So we're all part of the collective consciousness. So if the majority of people are, quote unquote, deficient, and let's just stick with magnesium here, then that's telling us a very important story about us as a collective, because we are all part of a collective consciousness. We have our own individual conscious, we have our own subconscious, but it's all part of a larger organism. And so through that deficiency, think about it from like a spiritual perspective. If we're deficient in, let's say, magnesium, which calms the nervous system, then it's telling us a very important story about the world and what in the population in which we live in, who have nervous systems that are all out of whack. So yes, from like a salt perspective in alchemy, yes, maybe our physical bodies are deficient in magnesium. But if you look at it from like an emotional or mental, which would be the mercury of alchemy, or the spiritual wound or the soul lesson of that deficiency, now we're getting to the holistic remedy here of what is really taking place in the consciousness of man, which is not just a deficiency in magnesium, it's a deficiency in that inner calm of like being one with your body, but also one with your collective. So we're very out of whack in that perspective.
Okay, that's very interesting. So let's say that we are deficient in vitamin D because we're indoors all day. We're deficient in magnesium because we're stressed and anxious all day. Let's just say that we're deficient in iron. So then I think, okay, what has iron in it? Spinach and green leaves, whatever, right? So then I think, okay, 300 years ago, if we weren't deficient in iron, does that mean we were having lots of green leafy vegetables? If the answer is yes, and then you could say we're eating processed food now, which is why we don't have enough iron, makes perfect sense. If we say, well, no, years ago we had iron, but we basically had bread and rice and grains, what's changed? So that goes back to what you're saying, the other side of it. So if someone is deficient in iron, if the population collectively is deficient in iron, what and they weren't, say, 200-300 years ago, what has changed if you take away the food? So as we said about anxiety, magnesium,
Okay,
relate
so
to like that.
let's talk about the iron for a second, because this would be a good analogy. So Mars, being that planet of war, right? It's the hot, fiery, divine masculine energy, right? It's masculine, it's hot. And so when we have a deficiency in iron, so think about like masculinity, okay? Masculinity in the modern era is potentially has an imbalance of masculine energy. So if we're deficient in iron, there's something going on with our masculine energy. So if we look at the past, and if they didn't have, like for this example, an iron deficiency, maybe they had a better relationship with their masculine energy. You see what I'm saying?
So for example, there's an imbalance between masculine and feminine energy in the individual. It's all out of whack. People are more one than the other. You've got women becoming the masculine and the mothering the man because his mother was in a masculine. You've got the world being ruled by men and it's all going to shit. So women are trying to step up and do it properly. And so now it's out of balance. So what you're saying is that if you relate it to the imbalance of masculine energy and how we're all kind of just slaves to Netflix and slaves to our phone, which basically means surrendering, being weak, just submissive, rather than going out, taking charge and going and get the mates, but instead put on our phones, on dating apps, watching porn, then you could say that our bodies are deficient in iron because it's related to the not being in our masculine energy, right?
It's one of the alchemical principles. Yeah. So in our spiritual development, right, of our masculine energy, it is deficient. So is that going to cause deficiency in our salt part of our alchemy? Because there's 3 principles, right? There's the salt, the mercury, and the sulfur. So on a spiritual level, we have some kind of issue going on with the divine masculine. Is that going to affect our salt body? Sure. So now we're going to have a deficiency in our actual physical vessel. And it's also going to affect our emotions and our mind, because it's all holistic. It's all one. It's not just you need to eat red meat. Okay. It's a deeper spiritual, mental, and physical deficiency.
Is it like, for example, you can't just take vitamin D, and because you're taking vitamin D, it's going to go into your blood. If your gut isn't set up to absorb it, you're not going to do shit. So let's just say that you are eating lots of green vegetables and steak, which has a lot of iron in it. If our masculine energy is out of balance, so you're saying that we won't be able to absorb the iron through the food. So we've got to be a match on the energetic level, the physical level to like be in harmony, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
that also
because
makes
you
sense
can't
to the
segregate
magnesium.
it. That's the problem. See, our ancient ancestors, they were connected to the stars. That's why they founded astrology, right? They were connected on a deeper macro level, where today people just call it woo woo, or they just like full of hot air, because they're so left brain dominant. So they've denied even the feminine aspect to know that underworld deserves as much attention as the physical manifested world.
Okay, so let's go on to vitamin B. What is that related to? Because everything so far makes perfect sense.
Well, there's a series of there's so many vitamins, vitamin Bs. And so we need, like, let's take beta carotene, so think about color. This would probably be like the easier way to visualize this for your audience, but like beta carotene, like carrots. Okay. Carrots are orange, and the color orange is also corresponds to the sacral chakra. And the sacral chakra has to do with our, reproductive, our sex organs and things like that. So that would be the first thing to recognize that, your power, right? That core sexual power. And I'm not talking about the physical act of sex. I'm talking about your kundalini, where the fire rises within you, right? In that sacral. So like everything's kind of birthed from like, building up that power so that you can become powerful, because it's a lower chakra, right? You got the root, the sacral, and then it goes up into the solar plexus and so forth. So when we're talking about, a B vitamin, and we're talking about carrots, and we're talking about, finding that inner power, right? People that are deficient in vitamin B, they might be lacking that ability to manifest, right? Because manifestation comes from the womb, the womb of creation, right? So we are talking about the underworld. So so everything is kind of corresponding, from the colors to the vitamins to the zodiac to the planets. Elements. It's all connected. And the more that you activate these higher faculties and you start to see the red threads that connect everything, your healing journey just takes a completely different road.
How long have you got, by the way?
I do probably have to go in probably at least like 5 more minutes, but I'm thrilled that you're enjoying this conversation, because I am.
All right, we'll quickly end it, and then we'll just ask you the question again. So anything you want to promote or plug?
Honestly, just check out sacredanarchy.org. I have so much information there, from all the stuff we're talking about, from astrology to alchemy to magic to the planets. The whole thing is on there. So sacredanarchy.org is just a great place to send people.
And if you had one day left to live, what is the one thing that you would tell the rest of the world?
Oh gosh, if I had one thing I wanted to tell. Whatever you want to create, make sure that what you're leaving behind is in service to those who will benefit in future generations. I think when you come from that perspective, that you are so divine that your essence continues to live on. But for those future generations, like let's say you don't reincarnate here, you've got this legacy, you've got this divine wisdom. Leave a mark, but leave it for those who are going to also continue that path. Because if you think about all of our teachers, they are still our teachers even when they're not here. And without them, like I have so many people, like David Lynch just passed over, these people that have crossed over, they've left a mark, and they've left a mark on the collective. And so I want people to start thinking about not just where they want to be in 5 years or 50 years, but when you're gone, what do you want people to remember? But also, what did you want to say? Make sure to say it before it ends.
And one last thing, people say that we're deficient in potassium, and now relate that to what we just discussed.
Oh gosh, potassium. Oh gosh. I'm not an encyclopedia for all of the nutrients, but I will say that, micronutrients are very important. So get your micronutrients, get your macronutrients, and recognize that even the smallest, because a lot of these, vitamins and nutrients we're talking about, you need such a small dose, but that small dose becomes so important. So, think about vitamins as like, you only need a splash. But when you don't have the splash, it's like the fine details are the secret. So don't forget about the small details. Don't just look over, I only need a small thing of zinc. It can't be that important. It is that important. It's so small, but those small things matter. And so take all of those little things and recognize that to be truly healthy, is in the fine details.
And the foundation of your body must already be set up for these small things to make a difference. And to end, we're all sexually suppressed. Our vitamin D, a vitamin B, as you said, right, related to that kind of sexual blockage of energy. Well, we're all suppressed. We're not having sex as much anymore, which means that a vitamin B isn't having the same effect on us, right? To end.
Honestly, all of, I would say if you want to learn about, the vitamins, think figure out, think about a plant. Let me just ask you a question. Think about a plant that you really like. For some reason, you just really like it. It just resonates with you. Can you think of one?
The Acer tree.
Okay. So that means that you need to go and research that tree, find out its vitamin content, find out what it's really rich in, and then figure out where it grows, what its habitat is, what environment does it grow in, because it's going to tell you a story about you, right? So one of my plant doctors, the one that I resonate off the top of my head that resonates really highly with me is the plant or the tree eucalyptus, because eucalyptus grows in very harsh, hot, dry climate. So I know that, when I work with eucalyptus, I've got dried eucalyptus sitting in my shower, I've got essential oils, all this, it's working to help me because I've grown up in a harsh condition. So you want to look at the history, start to learn about nature and its environment, because it's teaching you about where you've been and how to initiate yourself into the next level of consciousness where you're not affected by, the past. And so it might be that tree has nutrients that your soul is craving, which is why you like that tree so much.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please remember to subscribe, turn the bell notifications on, like the episode, and comment below. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's YesKingOliver. Take a look at the other videos to your side. And if you just want to listen to this podcast, you can do so on Apple and Spotify and most other platforms by going to talkwitholiver.com.